Hi everyone, it's Elfkan. Before we begin, I would like to put a disclaimer that this does not replace any real firearm training, and Rixas does not aim to fully replicate real life in any way. So please don't use this as a tool to design actual firearms. Alright, so the first question is, what do these funny numbers in the composition mean? They refer to the different grades of SAA or AISI steel. And usually, for a normal person, the first number in the 4 digits is the most important, because that refers to the type of steel. For example, 1 refers to carbon steel, and 6 refers to chromium vanadium steels, and so on. So when we open the material references to the right here, we can actually take a look at all of the important statistics that are in the game right now for quick reference. For example, density, yield strength, whatever. So what's most important for you is usually the density, the cost, and the yield strength. What the yield strength basically means is this is the amount of stress that the steel can take before it starts deforming like a plastic, which is not good. So we want to keep the forces below that amount. All right, so tips with the receiver. So with the main composition, I usually want to choose something that has built-in corrosion and rust resistance. So not only the strength matters, but the other properties matters as well, because we want to reduce the wear and tear on the receiver and keep it functional for as long as possible. For example, in real life, the 4X series is really popular. So something like the 4140 would do just fine. Of course, in-game, depending on your material situation and your budgeting, you might want to choose something else. And that also goes for the production method. So stamped or milled. So this is quite distinct from real life in that they will make more of a difference, especially with the tech levels that you're going to encounter, with stamping just being in its infancy, especially for high precision tasks such as receiver stamping. So make sure that you're careful with the tech level. When your manufacturing gets better, then you can use more stamped items if you can. And with this disassembly, some people ask why there are multiple types. Why don't you want it to be just tools or simple? Well, it really depends on the hardware that you're using. If your receiver is a really complex clockwork box, you don't want troops handling the insides and messing it up. And with the barrel attachment, make sure that you choose one and make sure that the barrel has the exact same attachment. So that's it for the receiver section. Okay, tips for the magazine section. So there's a bunch of different magazine types that you can choose. Make sure that you pick the orientation that your magazine type is going to use. And you don't need a floor plate if you are doing something that is external. For example, the detachable or the belt. Those don't need a floor plate because you won't need access to it since it's completely separate. And also make sure to choose an ammo fit if applicable, with the single column and staggered. And if you're using a detachable magazine, make sure that the fit is the same. And that's it for the magazine section. One thing I wanted to add for the magazine section is that the magazine cutoff option seems really strange, but usually you might want this mostly for role play purposes or in a political situation where most of your officers demand it in the early days of large capacity magazines, then you might want it. All right, and with the trigger and guard section, so the composition, of course, is just for that. And with the action, it will tell you which actions that you can choose. And some people aren't familiar with the different types, so I'll just go through a few of them. So single action, that just means when you press it, it goes with a base weight, for example, 1 kilogram or about 2.5 pounds. Once they enact that, pull that weight, and it fires. And with the single set, the difference between single set and double set is whether they have 1 or 2 triggers. So with single set, you pull the first weight, and then the second weight is usually a lot lighter. And for the double set, you can have the same thing, except that there's 2 triggers, front or behind or next to each other, that the person has to pull in succession. And with multi-fire, that's for self-loading only. Some of these options are quite interesting. So you have your normal fire selector, and dual trigger is pretty self-explanatory. Progressive means that there's different weights to it, so it's the same. So if you pull it like halfway, it's semi-auto. If you pull it all the way, it becomes full. And double crescent is kind of like a double trigger in one trigger, where pulling the top of the trigger results in one thing and the bottom in a different thing. And make sure to have a placement. That's it for the trigger section. All right, and for the bolt, there's different types. So mostly you'll be using the rotating bolt. For some self-loading options, you might use some of the other ones, most likely the block option. If you are using the other ones, the errors will probably scream at you, but please do not put locking lugs or locking numbers in them, because that's not what they're meant to do. And again, with the bolt, this is the part that's going to be receiving most of the force of the actual cartridge in your receiver, other than a few other parts, but they aren't included or modeled right now. So make sure it's strong, has good corrosion and rust resistance, as we mentioned with other materials. Otherwise, with the rotating bolt, most interesting one, the reason why you might want to put the locking lug forward or backwards is based on if you want accuracy or ease of using the bolt and better tolerances for poorer cartridges. And the locking lug numbers, just how many locking lugs there are. 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if you have a higher pressure cartridge, or you want less chance of failure, you might want to add more. And that's it for the bolt. For the ejector or interrupter, this part is basically, if you don't know too much about guns, if you recall, if people shoot something, and when the bolt slides open, then the cartridge flies out. This is what makes it do that. And the 1 piece and 2 piece is just the ease of construction. The two-piece is usually easier, and in this game it will be slightly less reliable based on technology. Again, stamped or milled. That's based on your industry and how well they can handle that. That's it for the ejector. For the cartridge section, make sure to insert the dimensions of the cartridge that you want to use. And for easy usage, we have this load design button that you can use to load a cartridge that you've already designed. It's going to input that information for you. And for the additional metal work, this is, I think, one of the most overlooked parts. And these are different finishes, which is basically coating or work done to the outside to protect it, and also case hardening to harden the outer parts. The reason why they don't case harden the entire part is because it changes the material properties of the receiver. So it only makes the outside more brittle and tough, and that's a good thing for just reducing wear and tear, but it's a bad thing for the internals. So that's why it only affects the outside. And with these different options, you can research them on your own. That's it for the metalwork. So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the self-loading options. Again, this shows up when you pick an action type that is self-loading, and you will need to choose between open bolt and closed bolt. And in Rixas, the distinction between the two in terms of the advantages and disadvantages are quite clear. The open bolt will have better heat conduction, and also it eliminates cook-off because the bolt is held to the end of the receiver, so there is no round in the chamber, so nothing dangerous like that will happen. So this is usually used for your more fully automatic weapons that you know will be firing for longer durations of time. And with closed bolts, the thing that you'll get is accuracy, because when the user pulls the trigger, the bolt doesn't have to move first. But the difference is that you might get ammunition cook-off, and you also will have poor heat conduction. And the desk cover is only used in the open bolt option, so that dust doesn't get in because there's a wide gaping hole. Hope you guys found that video helpful. If you have any further questions or comments, leave them below or in the Discord in the design help section. See you all later.